Well, if you really like Ryan Gosling's character in this, you might even say that he's the man. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about a newer release, The Gray Man. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie were, if you already saw it, or if you were planning on seeing it, and make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my content out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with more movie-related content like Netflix reviews on a near-daily basis. But let's not waste any more time and let's talk about The Gray Man. This stars Ryan Gosling as Six, the CIA's most skilled operative, whose true identity is known to none. When he accidentally uncovers dark agency secrets, a psychopathic former colleague puts a bounty on his head, setting off a global manhunt by international assassins. Based on the novel of the same name, this is directed by the Russo brothers, with Joe Russo also co-writing the screenplay with Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, reuniting the whole team that worked together on Captain America the Winter Soldier and Civil War, as well as Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. And it hit Netflix in July after a limited theatrical release. Now, admittedly, I wasn't quite so hyped for this one. Not that I wasn't looking forward to it at all, but maybe just nowhere near as much as others were. For one thing, I'm admittedly not exactly a huge spy thriller fan unless there's something really creative to the setup. And while this trailer looked fun enough with a great cast, it did feel like it would be just like any other spy thriller we've seen before. On top of the fact that, despite this team all working together on some of the more critically acclaimed and beloved Marvel productions, you do also have to keep in mind that the majority of the Russo's filmography is with Marvel, and when it comes to working with Marvel, even with some of the most visually distinct directors, they still have to stay confined tonally within the MCU. So there still wasn't enough there for me to get hyped enough for a Russo's film because I don't know what they're truly capable of when left completely to their own devices. Because what didn't help either was that I just was not a big fan of their last film, Cherry. So in my mind, if that was an indicator of what they're going to be like when left to do their own thing, that had me a little nervous for this, despite such a top-notch cast leading the way. So maybe it's because of those lowered expectations, but consider me surprised when I came out of this liking it a lot more than I thought I would. Now, it's worth noting that it did partially confirm what I thought this might be. In some ways, this does feel a little bit like your typical by-the-numbers spy thriller. Even with it being based on a novel, it does follow a familiar structure of someone who works for this agency and is loyal to them for all these years, only for them to turn on him when he starts digging into their secrets. I wouldn't say it offered any real surprises in that regard. Now, there's a lot of exposition and name referencing and all these missions these characters go on to try and make it feel considerably denser, but truthfully, a lot of it winds up being nothing you really need to retain and amounts to nothing more than mumbo jumbo, especially considering this jumps around so much setting-wise, it can almost be a little difficult to keep up with. Like with the amount of countries we see our characters enter, it might have been easier to just count the places where they didn't go. And from a character perspective, everyone plays into tropes we've seen countless times before, and there isn't exactly much in the way of anything truly profound, with there only being one relationship that has any sort of emotional resonance, that being between Gosling Six and a girl he once protected who the CIA kidnaps here, played by Julia Butters, who you might remember better as the young girl who stole the show in a brief part in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But beyond that, the character development in general is at an absolute minimum. Yet despite that, I wound up actually still finding enough elements for me to actually enjoy this. While it's not always the most emotionally resonant movie out there, from an entertainment standpoint, it definitely gets the job done. This feels closer to what the Russos were doing with The Winter Soldier, where it's heavily influenced by political thrillers and action movies of the 70s or even the late 60s. And you see that especially in the overall visual aesthetic, with its grainier feel, its incredibly slick action scenes, and a lot of high-speed chases, with some sequences reminding me of something straight out of The French Connection or Bullet. In fact, once we get to this one chase sequence through the streets of Prague about just under halfway through the movie, I think that's where it really picked up. The sense of style in each of these fight scenes and chase sequences made them feel pretty gripping, with some great moments of hand-to-hand combat thrown in there. And the frequency in which we get a lot of these action scenes was done at just the right pace so that the film didn't feel like a slog, but it didn't go overboard to the point where it felt obnoxious. And while the film isn't exactly the heaviest on character development, it isn't emotionally hollow, primarily due to the performances by all our leads. Ryan Gosling essentially plays a version of his character in Drive, where he's not always the most talkative and he keeps to himself, but at the same time, he gives off this sense of cool. There's an air of mystery to him, and even though we never truly learn too much about him, there's still a level of intrigue in the way he carries himself that makes us fascinated by him and not feel completely emotionally cut off. It's a character type he may have done before, and it's by no means Gosling at his absolute best, but he makes it work. And as I said earlier, the deepest relationship we get here is between him and Julia Butters' character, who's also the niece of Gosling's old boss, played by Billy Bob Thornton. Similar to her appearance in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Butters is a scene stealer here, being one of the avenues of comedic relief for her very blunt nature and sharp sense of humor. She winds up being one of the few people who even remotely digs in at Six's humanity throughout this, and we do see there's a natural bond between them. And that gives us at least one endearing connection to get invested in, so I thought that was all well done. Now, Chris Evans plays our villain, this sociopathic hitman who goes after Gosling, and he was a blast here. The interactions with him would be fun, as we see he's someone who revels in just doing what he does, with no morals whatsoever. So he'll just make these little clips while in the middle of doing something truly awful, and the way it would play out, it would also make for some bits of dark humor. But because Evans was clearly having a blast with the role, just running with how out there this guy was, it helped add a lot of flair to his sequences, and it made the cat and mouse chase between him and Gosling feel considerably more fun, while also cranking up the stakes in each scene, given how unpredictable the character could be. Now, besides the film feeling a bit generic and jumping around way more often than it should have, my only other criticisms were the fact that, going hand in hand with the former, it can maybe feel a touch too long. It's about 2 hours and 10 minutes, and I think it could have cut things down just a bit, mainly in its first act, to get to the point a little quicker, especially as it felt half the names and events and references it throws out there all really amount to kind of nothing in the grand scheme of things. If it just cut some of that out, it would have tightened up the pacing and it would flow a little better overall, as opposed to just in the second half. Also, most of the cast, outside of the names I already mentioned, were kinda underutilized. They all worked with what they were given, with Thornton, Ana de Armas as an agent who helped Six, and Alfred Woodard as one of Six's contacts, doing as best as they could, but most of the supporting cast didn't quite have as many standout moments as either Gosling, Evans, or Butters. In particular, you have Jessica Henwick and Renee Jean Page as the two CIA officials who send in Evans and are meant to be some of the masterminds behind this big cover-up, with Henwick's involvement being a little reluctant. But Page in particular is supposed to be the real big bad of the movie, as he's the one bent on getting rid of Gosling, and I think his character could have had a little bit of a bigger presence. He's set up nicely in the first act, but once he brings in Chris Evans, he essentially disappears for long stretches of the movie, and I think that undercuts a little of the fact that this cover-up goes beyond just Gosling taking care of Evans. Even though Evans is the primary antagonist, he's still ultimately one part of a bigger picture, which is an essential part of these sort of political spy thrillers. But you don't fully quite get that because the people above him just feel a bit non-existent. They do explore a little bit of what's going on behind the scenes, with Henwick maybe a bit hesitant at going along with all this, even though she doesn't do much to go against it, and she still is more of an antagonist herself at the end of the day. But I would have liked had they gone just a bit deeper with that in order to properly capture the stakes of the situation. The Gray Man doesn't reinvent the wheel as far as the spy thriller genre goes, but for what it was surprisingly more entertaining than I thought it would be. It might have a generic setup, and it isn't the deepest on character development, but it does have a great sense of style with its action scenes due to its 70s influenced chase sequences. It's got two great leads, and a surprisingly sharp sense of humor to make for an all-around entertaining time. The Gray Man gets a 7.5 out of 10. So let me know, did you see The Gray Man, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Is this one of your favorite Russo brothers movies? Is it one of your new favorite Ryan Gosling movies? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep having fun with film.